So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this WorkNet or workforce session over Quest Disaster, Quality Jobs, Equity Strategy, and Training. We are excited to present this information to you today to all of the grantees, and we thank you for taking the time out of your Friday afternoon to join us. Couple of housekeeping items before we get started. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. I know it is quite the mouthful. We are ICSPS. It is a long acronym, and I'm sure you guys are all familiar with those long acronyms, right? So a couple things, we are on a Zoom meeting platform. This session is going to be recorded, and we will send the recording and the documents out in a follow-up email following this session. So you'll have full access to that. And then I'm also going to put the slide deck and all the documents that Jill is going to be showing us today in the chat. So you can download those right away. Just give me a second. Once I finish talking, I'll go ahead and do that. We do have live closed captioning on if you want that for your accessibility, and you can save that closed captioning as well. So if you want to save it for just your own meeting notes, but also this will be recorded as well. And then for any questions, we ask that you just post those questions in the chat. And then also, if you would like to ask a question live, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you. And then that way we can kind of have that open discussion as well. So I believe that's everything that I have. I'm going to hand it off to Jill to get us started, and I'll put those documents in the chat here.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. And now one thing I don't know, Kirsten, I'm looking at my screen and I see this meeting is being recorded by the host.
Yep, that's me.
Okay, so is that something I can get rid of or you can get rid of, or?
You should just be able to press OK.
Well, it says leave meeting, or okay, it does say got it. You're right.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I was afraid to hit leave me.
Yep, no problem. Yep, don't click that.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time for the webinar today. It's a great opportunity to go over the Quest application, which is where we're at in the process right now. So with that, I did want to kind of give a little bit of background information. With the Quest project, it's a DWG grant, a National Dislocated Worker Grant opportunity, and we did submit, DCO submitted the grant application back in July. We expect to hear by September 30th whether or not we received a grant award, and if so, how much. We used your pre-applications. There's 8 LWIAs who submitted pre-applications wanting to participate in this project. So we took your applications and we built our application. We developed it based on what you submitted. Consistent with what DOL has been stressing with this Quest TEAGL and the one prior to that and webinars is that they're wanting states and locals to expedite some processes. One in particular at the state level is expediting the subgrant process. I know some of you are participating in the career DWG that we got last year, and that was very slow to get started in terms of getting a subgrant set up. So OET, we're moving forward now with the next step, even though we don't have a grant award. We're just confident, we're optimistic based on our history. Our expectation is that we will be receiving grant funds. So we are moving forward with this next step in terms of the LWIAs submitting application. So that's where we are today, is working on the applications and the other documents that would go along with this package. So what we've sent you so far is that we do need your application submitted to me by September 12th, but I want you to contact me with any questions as you're working on it. Either email me, call me. It's not competitive in terms that you've already submitted your pre-application. We're moving forward with your project. So don't hesitate to just call me with questions that you have, because I'd rather, I guess, work through it while you're developing it rather than get something and then we've got to slow down and backtrack. So just reach out to me as you have questions. We're going to be sending out the project goals. What I refer to, you submitted a pre-application, back a month or so ago. And the top part of that pre-application document was really your project goals. It laid out your number of participants and what services they were in. Also, it laid out your expenditure plan. So that's what I refer to as your project goals. I'm going to send that page out to each of you to update that. What we want you to do, though, is to complete it with the same funding level that you requested initially, since that's what we based our DOL application on. We'll also be sending you out the uniform budget template, and that's where you'll have a chance to explain your budget items in terms of when we look and we see that you have, 50,000 for ITAs, what does that mean, or for work-based training. So the uniform budget, in that narrative, we do expect a detailed narrative to explain, to justify, to show the calculations of how that was arrived at. And then we'll be sending other documents, the usual ones that go along with the new grant. For example, the uniform application. And I've mentioned Lorraine's name here. Lorraine is going to be the grant manager for this in terms of packaging and processing the grants, the Quest grants. So we'll be working with Lorraine to get everything ready to go, the whole package. The funding amount I just mentioned, we're expecting, we want you to move forward with the amount you requested in your pre-application, but the funding amount is contingent on the final DOL award. If they give us less, we'll have to reconfigure things. And there is possibility of incremental funding. I mentioned that in the email that I sent. We have no idea right now if that'll be the case. And I know that does complicate things, but we'll just deal with that if that is how it turns out. Again, we expect to hear from DOL by September 30th. So the last week or two of September is when we would know something. So we've got 8 OEs participating, and the anticipated grant period is, we expect to start November 1st. As you know, we are moving forward with subgrants. We're trying to get moving. November 1st is what we're shooting for, and it would go through September 30th of 24. The local performance does apply. This isn't a WIA 90 grant. It's not, it is something that your local WIA will be reflected in your local performance. With the project, you do need to follow state and local policy. So in taking a look at your local policies, dealing with supportive services, ITAs, OJTs, all of that, do follow your local policies. The one thing I wanted to point out is that we're working on developing a formal DWG policy. We've operated in past years with guidance, where we send information out to you and it's guidance on how to operate the program and what the requirements are, that type of thing. But with this current TEGL, DOL does require a formal policy. So we're working with Laura Dom, and she'll be developing formal DWG policy. And then just a reminder that when we get these DWG grants, like this Quest grant, it isn't a standalone program. The design of your program and the operation, the implementation of it, it does need to, you do need to coordinate your efforts with other things, your rapid response, layoff aversion, the formula activities, business engagement. So this is just one piece, one component, one tool you have in terms of serving your community. Again, it's not a standalone program. It's not isolated. So a couple of things here to emphasize. The Quest DWG, it's a COVID disaster project. And two key words there are COVID and disaster. So what that means is that because it's a disaster grant, there's 4 categories of eligibility, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So it's not just dislocated workers, it's an expanded eligibility category where there's 4 of them. So that's good news. It gives you, more flexibility, a larger pool to draw from in terms of enrollment. And then the second part of this, because it's a disaster grant, it means that not only are you providing employment and training services, but you do have the option of providing the disaster relief employment, the disaster work sites where we help the community recover from the disaster. That, as I said, is optional, and we only have 2 LWIAs that are doing that. So we're really not going to spend time today going through the details of that, because it is a very complex, very difficult project to operate, the disaster relief employment piece. And since there's only 2 of you that are doing it, and the fact that you've been doing it, those 2 have been doing it for the last 2 years with their COVID grant, their COVID DWG grant. They're already operating it. Nothing's really changed. So I can deal with them one-on-one. So you won't see the DRE, the disaster relief employment screens in this particular webinar. So there's the emphasis on, I just wanted to emphasize what it means with this being a disaster project. The other part is that it's COVID. So when we talk about disaster and eligibility in a minute, it's related to COVID. That's what the disaster is. Sometimes we have a flood disaster or a tornado. This is, or opioid. Some of you have done the opioid project before, but this one is related to COVID. So some other things emphasized in DOL's TEAGL 222. So I want to take a second here to emphasize that is the target population is serving the underserved and the historically marginalized populations. High quality jobs, you're going to see that throughout the project, throughout the TEAGL, equity, and business engagement strategies. And as a reminder, when we talk about QUEST, the acronym stands for quality jobs, equity, strategy, and training. So I've highlighted those there in terms of what is being emphasized as you design your project and as you think about, how you're going to implement it, who your partners are going to be, that type of thing. Just keep in mind the QUEST acronym. Like I said, quality jobs, equity, strategy, and training. So hitting on the first one there, the target population, I basically took this information from the TEAGL, but I just wanted to address what DOL is thinking in terms of who is the target population. When they talk about the underserved and historically marginalized, that's what they're talking about, what is here. And so it's the group of people who've been excluded from full participation. And that deals with, education, economics, cultural, social, political. And then they've got a list there of, groups that have been excluded, but it's not limited to that. So what I want to say about that is that when we're talking about the underserved and historically marginalized, you and your own community know who that is. And we're looking to you to explain that in your application on who it is that you're going to be targeting. We're not asking you to identify 1, 2, 3, 4 groups that you're going to serve. You can serve I want to say is that everybody has to meet well stressed, and it is part of the application, is that they're acknowledging, or they want us to acknowledge that our outreach is being targeted. So whoever the historically marginalized, the underserved group is, are we doing appropriate outreach? Are we doing targeted outreach? Is it culturally sensitive? So that's another area that DOL has emphasized. High quality jobs. This is something repeated throughout all the recent Teagles, the webinars, and probably all your other WIOA grants and programs. High quality jobs is a common term. So it's not just Quest. I think it's something that is often discussed in WIOA programs. So this is how DOL has defined it. This was a part of the Teagle. They provided this definition. And I should mention that the screen that we were just on, that was from the Teagle too. They defined, they've got a terminology sheet that's a part of the chat. I've included it. And they've defined, explained what they meant by historically marginalized. They did the same with high quality jobs. On that terminology page, they've explained it. So that's what we're looking for with this project and with your application, is to talk about high quality jobs and how you'll be addressing it. It'll also be something addressed in the business engagement piece. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat. I think we have, I don't know if there were any questions in there. Maybe it's just Kirsten. Okay, so I think it was maybe Kirsten that had something there. So I'll go ahead and move along. I shouldn't be hitting so many buttons. I think that gets me in trouble. Okay, we talked about high quality jobs. Now, equity. So with equity, that again, it's a part of the acronym of Quest. So it is something that DOL emphasizes, and it basically explains it there as to what it is. Again, recognizing that not everybody starts out from the same place. And so, you know, we're talking about outcomes for people and that type of things in terms of also looking at maybe any biases or that type of thing. And this is something, again, that you're doing with all of your WIOA programs. This isn't anything unique to Quest, but it's something that DOL emphasizes repeatedly. And so it is a part of your application, and it's part of something that I wanted to share with you today, the equity piece. Okay, so business engagement. This, again, is an emphasized piece, and they talk about business engagement in two ways. One is strategic, and the other is operational. So we've got, before I get to that screen, let me just mention, we'll go through strategic and operational as it's explained in the Teagle. But I did want to mention that IWIB's committee, the Business Engagement Committee, you know, we're going to be working with them, and we're wanting you to be aware also and pay attention or follow the guidance, the recommendations, you know, that what we're learning from the IWIB committee that we're incorporating in the Quest project. Because again, business engagement is a key part of this particular DOL opportunity. So let me go ahead and go to the next one, the strategic level activities. And this, in your application, there is a section, I think it's number 8. Let me just take a quick look here. Yeah, number 8 is business engagement. And that's where we ask you to discuss your plans, your strategies. So in your application, number 8, go ahead and address what you're going to be doing in terms of business engagement. What I've laid out here and on the next screen is from DOL's Teagle, what they have suggested. So it's not a list of what you have to do. It's not anything, you know, that is limited to this. You have your own strategies, your existing work that you do, your existing activities. So these are just some things that I wanted to share in this webinar as a reminder of what's in the Teagle of things that you can do on a strategic level. The next one is the operational level. And there again, DOL lays out what it is that we would be doing there. Now, I'll have to admit, if you look at what DOL is saying in this section, the business section, business engagement, they do talk about, emphasizing, expanded, they do talk about quality jobs. And so it's recognized that as you work with employers, that there's an opportunity to work with them in terms of trying to improve, trying to impact, at least addressing high quality jobs. And that's this screen back here talks about that also. Sharing information on the value and business of increasing job quality and equity and support in creating and expanding high quality jobs. So the business engagement strategies, there is an emphasis on the high quality jobs. As you develop your strategies and your relationships is that component of it. Okay, so this, I wanted to lay out the project purpose, goal, and summary. Just to have it there in front of you as you do develop your application, kind of a reminder of what this project is to do, is, the purpose of it, the goals. Keeping in mind that as we move forward with it the next couple of years, we'll be doing a lot of reporting to DCO, but also to DOL. And so you'll be summarizing what you're doing with your project and how it's going. And as you're writing it, you're really going to be addressing, the purpose and the goal, how you're achieving it, how you're moving towards it. So I think it's just important as you're designing your project to have that in mind of where it is we're wanting to end up and what the purpose of it is. So with that, the goal, I just wanted to mention something with that, in that the goal talks about, in particular, talks about growth industry, high quality jobs, of course, but it does mention growth industries. And I just wanted to take a second because DOL is emphasizing these particular industries, the infrastructure, environment, climate, the care economy. That's a part of your application. It's laid out there and explained, but the bottom line is you do have to look at your particular community, your area, and see what the growth occupations are. But because DOL stresses these, and they've specifically named them, we've named them in the application too. So when you do write your application, go ahead and address that. But again, everything does need to be growth industries in your particular area. So some of the things in this summary is, it is a COVID project. And so part of what they're talking about too is with the services that be provided is they talk about the employment equity and individual, community, and industry resilience as the nation prioritizes economic and employment recovery from COVID. And the project would include partnership development, community outreach, business engagement, and then comprehensive services. And then, of course, the optional disaster relief employment piece. And then the focus of it, again, we've talked about who we're targeting, but on people whose employment has been negatively impacted by the pandemic, including individuals from historically marginalized and underserved populations that have been disproportionately impacted. So again, just laying all of this out in front of you as you're writing your application, as you're developing it, reminding where we're going with this, why we're doing it, what we're hoping to accomplish, and where we want to end up. So moving on to eligible participants, I mentioned earlier that because this is a disaster project, in particular a COVID disaster project, but there's 4 categories of eligibility. It's not just dislocated workers. When you have a disaster project, think of floods, tornadoes, hurricanes. When you've got those kinds of disasters, you quickly need to have a lot of eligible people ready to go and get started right away. And so, DL's recognize you need a standard pool of people, not a standard, an expanded pool of people, not just dislocated workers. So, the act was written in such a way that you'll see the first one there is dislocated workers. The second one is individuals temporarily or permanently laid off because of, in this case, COVID. And then the third one, they're long-term unemployed individuals, and they look to each state to define what that means. So across the country, there's a lot of different definitions, but this is the one we've been using for many years now. But it's somebody who has a work history and they're looking for employment, and they've been unemployed or underemployed for 10 weeks out of the last 26, or they're a person who doesn't have a work history, or they've got a sporadic work history, and they're seeking work. The last category, the fourth one, is for self-employed people who've become unemployed or significantly underemployed. So two things I want to mention with that. There's an asterisk there next to dislocated workers, and that's because as you operate the program, we want you to look first at making somebody eligible as a dislocated worker. That's the priority population, is making them eligible as a dislocated worker. If someone you're working with wanting to enroll doesn't meet the dislocated worker criteria, they might fall under one of these other three, which is great. But priority is to enroll people to make them eligible as dislocated workers whenever possible. And the main reason there is that they're eligible for co-enrollment into multiple grants. If they're eligible as, for example, number 2, individuals temporarily or permanently laid off as a consequence of COVID, if they're eligible under that one only, then they're not going to be eligible for your other dislocated worker grants. So the priority is to enroll them or make them eligible as dislocated workers first, whenever possible. The second thing that I want to mention is that part of what DOL was emphasizing was for at the state and local level to not only expedite processes, to get things moving more quickly, get services delivered more quickly, but also to review eligibility, definitions and interpretations to see if we're being too restrictive. So my note, maybe it's on the next page, but the state is looking at these 4 categories to see where we've got some flexibility. So let me move on to the IWDS screen. We're going to have more meetings, training once we get up and going, but I did want to at least share with you what those definitions translate to. Let me jump back here. Long-term unemployed, number 3. We talk about somebody who has a work history, unemployed, underemployed for 10 weeks, or somebody without a work history, sporadic work history. So IWDS has been set up and asks some questions to, show that someone would be eligible. So again, you're working with somebody as a dislocated worker, and hopefully they're eligible. But these questions are also here. Client has no work history. If you drop down, if you answer yes, they'd be eligible for a disaster grant. Was client unemployed or underemployed 10 weeks out of the last 26? If it's yes, they're eligible for this. Same thing then with the others. The 24 months temporary or seasonal, or that they've held a job last 24 months, employment ended more than once. So in IWDS, you'd see that this is really disaster specific. And if you can answer yes to any one of those, they would be eligible, and it would show under your IWDS when you're looking to certify, it would be showing up as a 1 in disaster eligibility. The next part, we don't need to go into that, but that's with disaster grants. And since only 2 of you are doing the actual disaster work, the temporary jobs, this next section of those 4 questions is what pertains. Everybody else, you'd be answering no to those in terms of received physical, tetanus shot, background check, drug screening. With those questions, it doesn't show it here, but I think it's like yeah or no, or not applicable. that type of thing. So we'll talk more about that later. I just wanted to give you an idea of what the screen looks like in terms of disaster projects. Many of you have seen it, but not everybody has. Okay, so the typical reporting, monitoring, and oversight. So with these grants, as I said, Lorraine's going to be handling these for us. And there's a lot of reporting that goes along with these. Some of it's for DCO, so we can stay on top of it between me, the monitors, management, but some of it is also for DOL. So there's a quarterly narrative report that we send to DOL. There's a monthly status report looking at target population statistics, so we can keep track, throughout the period of who it is you are enrolling, what the demographics look like. And then there also is weekly enrollment report for DOL. It's very simple in that we have to send a report, an email to DOL every week that shows what's happening in terms of enrollment, our enrollment numbers. So we ask you to send me weekly an email that tells us how many people you've enrolled in the grant. The typical, success stories, and then the other project information that's requested. It's from requests from, for example, the governor's office or DCO management. It's also from DOL. There's many times that we get an email, a request from the regional office, DOL Region 5, and they're needing some information from us. It's likely because at the national level, they're being asked to report on something. So quite often, I shouldn't say quite often, on occasion, you'll be getting an email from me where we'll be asking you something specific, and it might be because we're turning around and sending that off to DOL in response to their request for information. The other thing is the project implementation plan, and that includes your quarterly goals. Would be having you lay out your quarterly goals in terms of enrollment and expenditures to show the steady progress in terms of, enrolling people into the grant, into the training or the OJTs, steady progress of spending the money, and also reporting obligations, dollars that you've got attached to particular participants that aren't yet showing up in expenditures. And the thing I want to stress with that, I mentioned steady progress, is because you've got many other projects and grants going on related to dislocated workers, if it's your formula or your 1E, maybe even JTED. There's a lot of projects you have going on. And this is something that I just want to stress can't be put on the back burner. It's something that needs to start from the get-go and then have steady progress. Not putting the others first. So for example, you meet your training goal with the Formula 1D. It's a matter of juggling all of it at the same time and keeping this one moving and showing the steady progress. Monitoring and oversight. With that, you would of course be monitoring the project at the local level, reviewing the progress, and then making adjustments, as necessary. You'd be monitoring your progress in terms of how are you doing in enrolling people, where are you on track, or are you falling behind, what's the reason, and always turning to us, to me in particular, if you have any questions, concerns, maybe there's something we need to look at with your grant or your modifying the plan, that type of thing. So we look to you to stay on track on top of that. And then of course the DCO staff are going to monitor the grant as part of their regularly scheduled monitoring. It would just be another grant that they would be looking at. And then the expenditures are going to be reviewed monthly to see, how you're doing in terms of spending your money, and performance going to be reviewed in terms of meeting your enrollment goals and your service goals, and also in terms of meeting the project purpose. Are we still on track with doing what we need to in terms of the target population, the business engagement, that type of thing. And the final screen there is really, it's just the resources. So the first one's the Quest TGOL. The second one is DOL's new Teagle for DWG guidance. It replaced the one from March of 2020. So this one was maybe in June or May or June of this past year. And then Teagle 14 is performance. 1418 is performance for DWGs. And the last one is the regulations for DWG grants. So with that, let me go ahead and open it up for questions. I'm going to see.
Okay, so people should be able to unmute themselves now if they do have a question.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? I was trying to stay with a high-level overview, and again, wanting you to contact me if you have any questions as you're developing your application. No questions, which would be fine.
The only comment I have is, incremental funding, that really complicates it. So,
Yes.
If they change it into incremental funding, we got to rethink, because that got all messed up with the opioid thing.
Yeah. Incremental funding, I only mentioned now and in the email that I sent out because it is always a possibility and the grant amounts are large. I should mention we did request $11 million. That's a very large grant. And if it is incremental funding, for the most recent incremental funding project we had was opioid. We've had some in the past that might have been for flooding or for whatever purpose, and it does complicate it because DOL might say, okay, Illinois, we're going to give you $11 million, but we're only going to give you the first 1/3 of it. And then as you perform and you reach 70% expenditures, submit a grant modification and we can give you the second increment. And then there's a third increment. Well, they can do it however they want. And I mentioned a third. They could say a half. They can do whatever they want with it. But what that means then is not only DCO needs to, resubmit their application and kind of make some adjustments based on that incremental funding, but we would have to look to you as the sub-grantees. And if you requested, for example, $500,000, we would have to adjust that initial award to coincide, to align with what DCO is getting from DOL. So we'll deal with that if that's what happens. And we're gonna, work hard to make it, to do the best we can with it. It's a challenge and we know it's a challenge. So that's all I can say, but, we're moving forward and we will see what happens with it. If nobody else has any other questions, we can go ahead and wrap up. We'll be in touch in terms of the additional documents, the project goals page I mentioned. I'm basically, I've taken what you had sent at the top of your pre-application and it's in a separate project goals page. And just, you can update that. The dollar amount, as I said, we want to keep as is. And then the uniform budget, will be sending that to you along with any other forms that Lorraine's going to need to package it. We will let you know as soon as we know when we hear something from DOL. And again, all of this is expedited, trying to get sub-grants in place as quickly as possible. So we at the state level let me just get back to this real quick because it is such an emphasis. At the state level, we're doing what we can to review our processes and procedures and try to expedite things. But you probably saw in the application where we are asking you, let me see which question it is, but number 11, accelerating enrollment and service delivery. Asking you to take a look at your processes and what, if anything, what can be done to expedite the time period from when you talk to a client initially and when they're getting services delivered, you know, when they're enrolled and they're starting their services. And then that recognizes that there's some things that aren't in, you know, the ball's not in your court. It's out of your hands in terms of maybe IDS documentation, whatever it is. But that question number 11 is asking you to take a look at your own processes and see what can be done to expedite things. And then the other part of that is, let me just look at something here. Oh, asking, still part of 11, what steps will be taken to review local eligibility policies to enable the broadest participation? Again, at the state level, we're looking at eligibility and seeing, you know, if we're being too restrictive in some cases. So we would ask that you do the same thing at your level, at the local level, to see with your eligibility policies, you know, where you have the authority, locally defined, locally interpreted, you know, is there anything that you want to address there, anything where you feel that you are being too restrictive and you want to broaden it. The question number 12, I didn't mention it earlier, but because so much money is tied up with training, ITAs and also OJTs, work experience, whatever it might be, if it's registered apprenticeships, that with the Quest DWG grant, we're wanting, the question deals with, is there, you know, we're looking for you to explain your process and your timeline. For ITAs, for example, is it something that once a participant is enrolled, that it takes a month before it's going to show up as an expenditure, that ITA, or does it take 6 months? What's your, you know, explain that to us, because each of you, the LWs are so different. And we're just trying to understand the time lag and if there's anything that you can do at the local level, keeping in mind safeguarding funds, keeping internal controls. We're not asking you to shortcut things and jeopardize the integrity, the safeguarding of funds, but just taking a look at the process for ITAs and work-based training. So that's what number 12 is about. And again, the other part of it is in IWDS with your monthly reporting of expenditures, we'll have you use the 377 screen that reports obligations. And those obligations are tied to specific participants. So if a participant starts an ITA or starts an OJT, you know, what's the dollars associated with them for that? It's not an obligation in terms of, oh, we have subcontracted out $200,000 for ITA contracts or OJTs. You know, we're looking for it tied, the obligations. What we're talking about in terms of obligations is when it's tied to a particular participant. So I know I was wrapping things up, but I did want to just hit on those since I saw those there. And then the one along with it is the JTED grant. If there's, I think, a couple of you that have JTED grants. So we're looking in question 13 for you to explain that, how you're going to coordinate the grants. And then for those 2 of you that are doing the disaster relief, that is explained in question 14 on the application. So again, contact me as you're working on your application and we can talk through any questions or issues that you have. So stay in touch in that sense. And thanks everybody for participating. I greatly appreciate it. Have a great day. Thanks everybody. Bye.